Module 10, the water cycle. Water is critical to all living things, so it's an important part of the physical environment. Therefore, we need to understand where the water is in an ecosystem. Looking at this ecosystem of the shore of an ocean, we will follow how water tends to cycle around the various locations. This is called a water cycle, showing how water moves from one place to another. Beginning in the ocean, we see that water can evaporate to the air, eventually forming clouds. Clouds are made up of tiny bits of water condensed on dirt particles in the air. When enough water builds up in the clouds, it begins to precipitate in the form of rain or snow. This brings water back to the ocean. But some of the clouds move over land and can eventually cause precipitation to fall on the ground. Once it hits the ground, one of several things can happen to the water. It can evaporate again into the air. It can also be absorbed into the roots of growing plants. But if it does move into plants, it may eventually find itself back in the air due to a process that plants have called transpiration. Transpiration is evaporation of water from the leaves of a plant. But not all the water that falls onto land evaporates or transpires back to the air. Extra water can run along the surface of the land back into the ocean, or it can move into a river and flow back into the ocean. And here's where the story gets interesting. As the water flows along the land, it picks up nutrients and minerals on the land and brings them into the sea. So it's taking resources from one ecosystem, on land, and bringing them to another, in the ocean. These nutrients benefit creatures living in the ocean, so this is a critical part of the water cycle. Now let's look at the water cycle in an area called a watershed. A watershed is an ecosystem where all water runoff drains into a single body of water. Water enters a watershed via precipitation. It can leave via transpiration in plants, evaporation, or outward river flow. As the water flows over the land into the stream, it's called surface runoff. It can flow into the stream or be absorbed by the soil. If it sinks into the soil, it can be absorbed by plant roots, or it can move into the groundwater flowing under the surface of the land. Eventually, groundwater will flow into a river or stream. Watershed ecosystems are important because they enable water to absorb nutrients and minerals and transport them to other ecosystems. The plants in a watershed are very important too because they will not allow too many nutrients or minerals to be removed from the soil. If the plants are cut down, too many minerals may wash into the river, which could result in an algal bloom, causing problems for the organisms living in the water. Also, if too many nutrients and minerals are lost, then the soil itself will not be able to support a lot of plant life. Plants in a watershed will also keep too much soil from being washed into the lake or river as a result of water flowing along the surface. So, plants in a watershed are critical. That's why scientists are so concerned about deforestation. If too many forests are cut down, then there will not be protected watersheds. Surface runoff will take away too many nutrients and minerals out of the soil or erode the soil away into the rivers. This is a problem because there's a great immediate economic benefit to cutting down the lumber in the forests, and the long-term benefits of keeping the forests intact is not considered as important.
I'm standing in front of a large mountain in Iceland because I want you to see the cloud formation above the mountain. When we talk about the water cycle, we talk about how water evaporates out of the ocean and forms clouds. And sometimes those clouds move over land and then precipitate that water onto the land. And that's what's happening here. The clouds that have formed over this mountain represent water that has evaporated from the ocean, and the clouds then moved over the land and formed over the mountainside, and then eventually they will precipitate onto the land, then forming rivers that will flow back into the ocean again. So it kind of gives you a visual of the actual water cycle that goes on every day all around the world.